All right, I think we are ready. This is Robert Swartwood here with one of my infrequent Facebook Lives with author Laura Ellen Scott. I've known Laura for quite a while. I guess we can also talk about that. But
Yeah.
Laura is the author of Death Wishing, which I have a copy here,
Thank you.
the Juliet, and the three books in the New Royal Mysteries, the third of which is Blue Billy, which is just recently out. She lives based in Northern Virginia. She teaches at George Mason University, and quite honestly has been teaching there for quite a long time. So
That's for sure.
Laura, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me for this chat. I'm really pleased. I'm really pleased to see you. Really pleased to be able to talk about books again.
Yes, it has been quite a while since we talked last.
Yes.
So we just want to talk about let's see here. Let's start kind of from the beginning. Okay. So you've been teaching at George Mason now since you said 1993.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
it has been quite a while. You went to that's where you went to your grad school,
When I got
right?
my MFA from there, I went to Kent State for my undergrad, University of Southwestern Louisiana for part of my graduate work, and then finished up here at George Mason. And while I was here, I got a job, a part-time job as an academic advisor. And then when that associate chair moved on, they decided to create a more full-time position. So that's when I started teaching and advising and doing other administrative work. And I've been in that job since then.
Perfect. So during that time, were you writing then too? Were you writing like did you want to become a writer at that point? Or
I've always wanted to become a writer. My mom tells a story. I mean, this is sort of like everybody's background story, right? But my mom tells a story that before I could read, she caught me copying words out of the dictionary. And she asked me what I was doing. And I said I was writing a book. All right. Now, I have no idea if that's BS or she invented that story or anything, but I've always written all my life. I think the goal was always to write books, but when you enter into training in this sort of thing, you sort of have to work with the limits that they give you. And I started out with short stories, obviously, and that's sort of how you and I intersected with online publishing and short stories and hint fiction and things like that.
Yeah, and then so your first book was Death Wishing. Was this the first book that you actually wrote, or this was just the first book that was first published?
That's the first published book. I'd say that, when I got done with my MFA, I'd been writing and publishing short stories, got done with my MFA. There's a long time, and I'd started the job right away. And there was a long time when I did not write because I was learning my job, basically. But then when I started to get back into it, I think I wrote at least 2 almost full-length manuscripts of like really weird stuff that was very immature. It was almost like I'd become, really good at writing short stories. But when I went to start to write novels, which is what I wanted to do, it felt like I was starting at the beginning again. And so it's just not, there's a whole different focus when you're writing a novel than it is when you're writing a short story, especially if you're trained in writing literary short stories, which is what MFA programs did in the 20th century, almost exclusively, right? So, and even now, that's sort of the short story is the coin of the realm inside the classroom, right? So
what is your, you've been teaching so long now that I'm sure you've kind of gotten into a good rhythm with the teaching. Do you find that having taught so long and having your own kind of good teaching schedule that you were able to fit in a good writing schedule, or do you find it's difficult to kind of squeeze in writing, or how's that working?
It was difficult at the beginning, but the disadvantage of staying in the same job forever is that you don't make the same kind of money that people do when they just go from job to job. But then I don't really have to relearn a new job every time, right? I become better and better at what I currently do. That doesn't mean I don't change, but I think I'm one of those work smarter, not harder people. All right. So I have been able to create space just by becoming sort of expert at what I'm currently doing. Right. The other big part of this, though, is that I don't have children, and that's on purpose. But it does also create a lot of space in your life for doing other kinds of things. You know, I really don't know how people who are full-time employed and who also have children to raise actually put out books. I'm really impressed by parents who actually write books, right? But I get to spend I feel very privileged that I get to spend a lot of my time really devoted to my creative efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's then talk about Death Wishing. So I remember Death Wishing. I mean, it's been a while. This came out in 2011, so it's now 11
Right.
years old,
Right.
essentially. And this is a much different book
Oh, it
than
certainly is.
what Blue Billy is.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I don't want to kind of spend too much time on Death Wishing, but like, how do you go from this to 4 or 5 books later to this?
Yeah. So I think, well, I always write weird things. I always write weird things, even if I'm writing within what might be a traditional genre and that sort of thing. But my heart and soul in terms of reading has always been in mystery, crime, horror, that kind of thing. But I sort of crept up close to it. So I started out by, Death Wishing came out of being really shocked by Hurricane Katrina. We'd spent quite a lot of time in Louisiana. And we've been going to New Orleans at least once or twice a year. It was very close to our hearts. And then Hurricane Katrina came through, and that sort of woke me up and made me think, oh, not everything is always going to be the way it is, right? You can't just rely on New Orleans to be New Orleans forever. And so that's what started sort of me writing about that and trying to find out, well, how can I talk about how I feel about this place and do it in a way that is not self-indulgent, right? Or, and do it in a way that is really entertaining and funny. So the thrust of that book largely is funny. It was a tough book too, though, because it's the kind of book where the concept could go a lot of different ways and it could be really uncontrollable. So the premise there is that people's dying wishes are starting to come true, right? Not everyone's, but some people's, right? So working off of that, and then sort of telling the story of a divorced father and his adult son trying to work together again in this new environment, find a new home, that sort of thing. So so that was a book that I had no idea whether it was going to get any further than my other manuscripts. It was a book that I really loved and wanted it to be packed with all the funny stuff I possibly could. And then as I was writing it too, though, I started publishing excerpts from it, random excerpts from it, as flash fictions, right? And this was right when online publishing was becoming a little bit more legitimate. I happened to get in at just the right time. So did you. So did Scott Garrison, obviously, very, very influential in sort of creating an institution for recognizing the best in flash fiction and online fiction. And so, whereas I had this book that was very much grounded in weird stuff actually happening, I would then take out excerpts from the manuscript and present those as sort of decontextualized flash fictions. And everybody's saying, oh, wow, this is so surreal, right? This is you had Elvis shoot down a cloud, man. And I was like, okay, yeah, but that actually happens in the damn book, right? But then I have the other people trying to interpret what I mean by that, right? So that was really fun to take the most exciting parts and see how that could be embraced in different contexts. And when you have it in the longer form, in the novel format, you can actually create an argument for a kind of different physical universe in a sense. When you're taking it out and presenting it as flash, then you are sort of refocusing attention, right? And I found that extremely stimulating in the way that I had not found traditional conventional traditional short story writing as stimulating, because I was sort of working both ends, right? Working a kind of poetic end of interpretation and reader participation, and then working a long narrative end where I was controlling the information in a different way and saying, no, this is the experience you're supposed to have, in a sense.
So
that is the automatic cat litter box spinning around.
That's
I can
okay.
reach over and stop it,
No, don't
but
worry
it'll
about
be
it.
done in about 2 minutes.
It adds to the whole interview aesthetic. So I guess kind of going more, a lot of people like to, I never really use the term plotter pantser, but I know a lot of people do. So just because people really know that really well, and again, a plotter is someone who really kind of outlines, they kind of get the plot in, as opposed to a pantser where, they're writing by the seat of their pants. Again, I don't even know who came up with these terms, but how would you kind of describe yourself then, especially with the novels?
Yeah, so it would be smarter if I was writing out detailed plots and planning things. You can see behind me is my whiteboard here, and it's only got it's got the end of the book I'm working on right now. You can see it all says do not read, so don't read that because you wouldn't be able to figure it out anyway. I use a more generative approach when I'm writing my books. I think it's a little bit harder to do because you have to go back and sort of reconcile things or understand what you're trying to do. But I do think that my process is organically controlled. All right. I don't know if that makes sense to you, that I know that if I'm writing a small character in one part just to fill the gas tank or something, that I'm never going to leave them behind. I know they will come back around eventually and become someone else, reinterpreted without the book. And that gives I think that gives my narratives at least the feel of complexity, because it makes it sound like it makes it read like I planned it, when in fact, I just have the ideas and the ideas will come back to me, will reshape themselves and come back. So I do write some things down as I go along, just to keep certain things under control. Certainly in the Juliet, I had to manage timelines, right? That's another book that's all about different historical moments in a sense. And so that was a little bit trickier. But the basic question of that book was very simple. Where is the emerald? Where is this mythical emerald, right? Whereas the question of death wishing is much more complicated. What does this mean, right? What do dying wishes come true actually mean to the lives of the characters that I've written? So I do trust the concept. So I will come up, so almost always I will start with a basic idea that I think, oh, this is what my book is going to be about. This is going to be a central image of the book. And almost always that image will become crowded out or shoved aside. It'll still be part of the book, but something else will take priority. So with Blue Billy, that begins with me writing about a guy in a refrigerator.
Yeah, I wanted to talk. So I mentioned to you before we start recording here, I did, I have a copy here, which you actually sent me a copy, but I, want to get my own physical copy here. I started late last night. I'm about 30 pages in, and we are jumping around in time a lot.
Yeah.
We start out, and I had it here. We start out in 1984, and then we go to 1952. 1954, 1961, 1987, and then the next chapter, I haven't started that one yet, but it's 1992.
Right.
And I'm assuming we're kind of even go more into the present day. So is that something that you had to?
It'll continue to proceed in normal history now.
Right. So but is that something that you felt that had to be outlined, or even that you were kind of maybe in the back of your head, you kind of had that outline, or did you actually have to put it on your whiteboard, or how would that work?
No, and I'm glad you asked that, because I have done that kind of time jumping in previous books, and that it required a little bit more organization and control. But in this one, when I found myself doing it, I started with one particular, that opening bit about Blue Billy early on in his career, basically. And then I decided, okay, now I'm going to proceed from the first part of history of this book of this story, and go in a perfectly chronological fashion. So when we rejoin the character in the very beginning of the book, it's going to feel very normal and feel very like you're going to know what happened just before and what caused things. So it's actually more linear than my other books in a sense. But the reason why the other books might not seem that way is that the other books combine sort of different stories in a sense. And so you can accept those happening in different time frames.
Yeah, so let's go with okay, so the very first book in the new royal mystery was The
Uh-huh.
Mean Bone in Her Body.
Yes.
Um, when you wrote that book, did you feel like this was going to be the first book in a series, or at that time you were just, it was just you want to write the book, and then later you realized, oh, maybe I can tie a second book into this series, or like how did that work for you?
Literally, I had just gotten done with the Juliet, and Zara Kramer, who's the publisher at Panda Moon, was really happy. And she said, Laura, what do you want to write next? And I said, well, I want to try a mystery. And she goes, oh, you go ahead and do that. Right. So I already had this comfortable basket to be in. Right. That is, she had pretty much said that she would look at anything that I produced, and that she was very, very on my team in a sense. So I started, and I had actually written a long short story called The Murder Dog. And it was my first attempt at sort of playing with a college story, which I'd always thought I would never do. But we'd launched the BFA in creative writing here at George Mason. And mostly people were very, very positive, but I got like one or two comments from people saying, why are you doing that? Why are you making a kind of like as if we were making some sort of cash grab or something like that, right? And I thought, oh, wow, it never occurred to me that somebody who actually came from creative writing would have that kind of attitude about an undergraduate program in creative writing. The reason why we did it was because we were encountering so many students who weren't even freshmen yet, like 16, 17-year-olds who said, hey, I'm writing novels. What are you going to do to help me with that? I've already written 2 novels, right? And so we began to think, oh, we have to create a much more robust structure for people who are serious writers early on. Anyway, so I took that skepticism and I thought, well, there's lots of things you could do to do a cash grab in academia, and crime writing would be one of them. And I think that would attract a whole bunch of really interesting people. And so that's sort of the genesis of it in this long short story. And I went to Art Taylor. All right. Art Taylor, award-winning mystery writer. And he's a friend of mine. And I went to him and I said, hey, do you mind reading this 50-page thing? And he goes, no, yeah, sure. And he said, oh, that's a good story. I said, okay, is it a mystery? And he goes, sure, why not? So a lot of this is really about getting permission to do the thing that you think you want to do, right? Again, punching my way through and trying to teach myself, turning that into a larger book. And that really then is what led to other kinds of decisions, like setting it in Ohio, which is probably one of the dumbest things I could have done. But I really wanted to write about what it was like to grow up in Ohio and sort of render the places that I knew in Ohio as sort of Gothic, because they were to me, And then all of a sudden, I find myself writing about my family, right? So, the character in Mean Bone in Her Body that is the sort of destabilized graduate student is me writing about my sister's mental illness, and then it went from there. So the series, it does what I want it to do. I always thought it should be a trilogy. It could go on and do other things, but right now I'm satisfied with it. But I've been able to explore a lot of things throughout the series that are in the painful category of write what you know, which is not that I'm sensitive about it. It's just that, writing about people's mental illness, writing about being around corrections institutions, which I've seen way too much of, being near mental health facilities, things like that. Even as a young kid, I had a lot of experience with that. Got a lot of people in my family who, as they say, were guests of the state. And so pulling on that and trying to sort of talk a little bit about how normal it was, but also make it into an interesting, exciting story,
So bringing up Ohio then actually kind of makes me want to ask, so then you were born in Ohio? Is that where you were
Northeast
like
Ohio,
raised
yeah.
and born and raised?
Yeah.
How long were you there until
I
you
was
went to
in
college?
I was in Northeastern Ohio until I got married at 24, and then we spent the next few years in Athens, Ohio. And then a little bit, then shortly after that is when we moved to Louisiana. And we got back to Northern Virginia in, I believe, 1989.
And that's when you had attended George Mason. And
Correct.
you kind of have been there ever since.
Right, right.
Okay, interesting.
So my husband was an English professor as well. We were in Athens, Ohio. He was in graduate school in Athens, Ohio. And as his summer job, he taught at Chillicothe Prison. All right. He taught English at the prison. And this is the same institution that I'd had family members at when I was a young kid. So there's like kept circling around these places over and over and over again. Like it was sort of almost destiny for me to like know more about them or have them be part of my life in a sense. So it was a long time coming. I thought, okay, I'm going to exercise all that in these books. And I was really happy with the way it came out.
Okay, so you said that basically they work as like a trilogy then.
Yeah, I think they do. And I try to make them stand alone as well, but there is quite an obvious bridge from Crybaby Lane to Blue Billy. And because I foolishly thought, well, I'll make this last book a lot easier by not fully resolving the crimes of the second book. And then I took a whole bunch of time off and as I was saying before, I always think that it's going to be about this kernel, the story I have in my mind. And then when I get there, I realize, oh, there's quite a lot of other kind of story I want to tell. So that gets sort of pushed off the center a little bit.
Well, then what are you, I mean, like, so, right. So the whiteboard behind you that says, do not read. So
That's
clearly
right.
you're working on a book right now. So is that then not set in this? I mean, is it?
No, this is a total,
this
is standalone. It's called, right now the working title is The Obituary Project. It is a kind of horror dystopia novel. And quite honestly, I'm probably 5 to 20 pages from being done. I simply won't do it. I simply won't finish until I know what some kind of fantastic ending for it. But the main premise is a young boy who is coming of age at a time, and he has a sort of obsession with collecting particular obituaries out of the newspaper. And he's coming of age at a time when all of a sudden people are being visited by the ghosts of loved ones. And once they've been visited, they themselves are seemingly immortal, right? They stop aging in a sense. It's a tricky, the tricky part of it is that I'm writing about his childhood present now, but also what he is when he's an adult 10 to 12 years later. And so trying to sort of predict what world will be like under those conditions, where a lot of people are feeling like there is no end to life, and that it's 10 to 12 years from now, what's technology going to be like, what is society going to be like, that kind of thing. That's been the sort of next level challenge for me. It's been a real blast to write.
And then do you know, like, do you already have an idea of what you want to write after this one's completed, or that's still up, or is that still up in the air? I mean, how far ahead do you kind of look in terms of, I mean, you know, personally speaking, I probably have like 10 book ideas right now that I want to do. And it's all trying to decide, you know, juggling like what's, you know, the priority with whatever else. And then things just also come up. Like I just completed one recently that honestly, you know, a year ago, I had no idea I was going to write, but, you know, last fall, I started playing around with this idea and then it became this book that I decided to write, you know, immediately. So, I mean, how does that work for you? Like, do you have these ideas that you want to write it, or do things just kind of come up?
Well, you know, I think what usually happens when I finish a draft is I go into kind of like a non-thinking mode for a very short time. And then I forget what I do day to day. Right. And when I forget what it is I do from day to day, like, okay, how do I spend my time? How did I used to spend my time? Right. Then I start getting the itch to write a new book. And so ideas will come then. I don't have any stockpiled. In the imagination bank necessarily. I'm very lucky in that the new book tends to come to me as an idea at least 1 or 2 months after the old book is done.
And then do you know, like when that idea comes to you, do you know that that it is for a book, or is it maybe like initially like maybe, or it might be just be a short story, and then as the more you start thinking about it or you start writing, you realize no, there's a lot more story here? Or
Mhm.
how does that, or maybe sometimes you think you might have a book and then you start writing and you realize no, this is actually just maybe like a 6,000 word short story.
Yeah. I don't really write very many short stories anymore. I'm not a big reader of the genre. I'm not a big fan of it. I know how to do it. I'm a good technician when it comes to short stories. Now, there's some exceptions to that. When I'm given an assignment, like upcoming in June, there's going to be an anthology of short crime stories based on the songs of Warren Zevon called Lawyers, Guns, and Money. And I got the title song, and that was absolutely that was a blast to write, But I don't ever really get an urge to write a short story. I have the urge to write novels. I think I was talking to PJ Devlin, who's a novelist, a local novelist here. Talking to PJ Devlin, and she and I sort of agreed that we're really looking sort of like the next level challenge in a sense. What have we not done yet? So I think that when I started the New Royal Mysteries, it wasn't going to be good enough for me to write another standalone book. I wanted to do a series, right? So that it did say, okay, I don't know what it's going to be, but I want to be a person who has a 3-book series. And this next one then is me going into more full throttle into horror, which is something I love, and sort of teaching myself how to do that. I kind of, part of that challenge is I'm rarely frightened when I read a book, even a horror book. Now, there have been a couple of rare instances recently, but I'm rarely frightened when I read a horror book. So I wanted to create a book that actually once in a while had a jump scare, and I didn't know if that was technically even possible, so that's sort of what I'm working on. So, but it does seem like I am swinging back into perhaps more of the more fantastic areas, right? More unreal areas.
So it's actually interesting. And I don't want to, have you give anything really away from it there, but the idea of doing a jump scare in a book, can you kind of give an example of something that you've figured out, or is it?
I haven't figured it out. I know that I've done it. I've had people tell me, "Oh, that really upset me," and then I've had people say, "Oh, there's 3 jump scares in these 20 pages." I said, well, how did that happen? So I don't know how. I do just tend to work with my obsessions though, which tend to be all object based. So like, I don't have really original ideas. I love, the classic, let's go in the attic and open up a box of old photographs and see if it weirds us out, that kind of stuff. That's why, there's so much rot and decay in Blue Billy, and that's something I'm obsessed with as well. I don't like to be in almost any of those environments that I have written about in there. The Magic River Cafe, which is sort of dilapidated on the banks of a backwater, becomes a real locus of a lot of the activity of the book, especially in the present day. So I go with pretty much classic stuff. There are things that probably bother me more than bother other people. I'm not very interested in monsters, but I will say that, you've done this as well. It's sort of like sort of grappling with being raised with the specter of serial killers, right, over your head, and having that be a part of your daily fear of being a child or something like that, especially in Ohio. Growing up in the so-called golden age of that sort of thing and sort of working through it. So nobody wants a serial killer book right now, right? Why would they? Why would you want anyone? But yeah, that's where my head went to. I said, well, I better do this. I better do this book, right? So.
And the dedication even says, you dedicated to, I'm assuming the dean here is your husband, and then your mom, and also Rexine.
That's my daughter, yeah.
And it says this book is also dedicated to the Ohioans like me who grew up in the so-called golden age of serial killers. Believe me when I say that we are all grateful for the opportunity to watch scientists bring that age to a close.
Right.
And it was actually kind of funny, because not a couple of days ago, I was talking to a writer friend of mine, and he was kind of struggling on, wanting to, I guess, what to write on. He writes more crime, mystery. And I told him, I said, if you really want to try to write something and get it placed serial killer thrillers are still a thing. I said, I
Or,
struggle with it on my end because I feel like serial killers are not really a thing. But you look at James Patterson, you look at a lot of other things, they're popular. Readers really like to read about serial killers, even
well, I
though,
think that when you wrote Serial Killer's Wife, that really reignited an interest there, because that was like a title that told a story even before anybody cracked the book, right? So it's almost like it was going and then, right?
yeah, but it was interesting. I mean, at least with that book, it's not as your typical serial killer book. I mean,
Right.
you look at like a James Patterson novel where you have the killer, you have the FBI agent, the cop. I mean, they're hunting it. But those, I look around, at the bookstore or on Amazon, and I see that, these books still continue to do well. And what I struggle with is, I would love to do like another serial killer book. I mean, actual serial killer type of thriller, because again, I think that those are very popular, but I struggle with that because nowadays, and I guess there's more challenge to it because like you said, with scientists and stuff, like back in the day, you know, killers could go anywhere. There was no social media. There was no real kind of like DNA testing. I mean, it was much
Right.
easier for these killers as opposed to now, where I'm sure it still happens. It's just not as, frequent and so it was just very interesting that you had brought that into, writing a serial killer novel,
Yeah.
but I guess you kind of go with it a little bit. And again, you worked it into this, this whole mystery series that you're doing. And again, I've only read about 30 pages so far, so I haven't gotten too far into it.
Well, the
But
idea is that people don't believe in Blue Billy.
right.
All right. It's just a name that they came up with, and law enforcement doesn't believe in it. None of the authorities believe in it. But there better be a Blue Billy, right?
So yeah, no, that is really good. And I'm really enjoying the book so far.
Forensic genealogy, just a quick side one here.
Yeah.
One of the things that they're finding out about a lot of the cold cases that we would have linked them together to, oh, this is all the work of, maybe a couple of serial killers, something like that. They're finding out that a lot of cold cases are one and done. All right. They're finding out that a lot of cold cases are committed by somebody who kills once horribly and then goes back to their lives. That is terrifying.
Yeah, there was a Lawrence Block book not too long ago that kind of dealt with that. It was one of those, and I remember he had talked about it was kind of a different book for him. They had shopped it around. No publishers were really interested in it, because it starts out with this terrible murder, and then he kind of just goes and creates a whole nother life for himself, and basically. But then, but then with the idea of the whole science stuff, with the whole 23andMe, like just kind of worrying that things are eventually going to kind of come to it. But it was just kind of an interesting, but it's the same idea, the more once and done.
Yeah.
I forget what the name of that book was, but it was really good.
I can't remember it, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was just kind of interesting too, where he talked about even like, I think a few publishers who were interested in it wanted to change something about it. And I forget what it was, but he was very, dead set against just kind of keeping it as is. And that was a thing too. I remember reading where I think he said he kind of sat down just to do a couple of, 1,000 words, maybe thinking it would be a short story novella. And it became like a 50, 60,000 word novel. It kind of grew from there. So what are you reading right now that's not school related?
Oh, okay. I was actually thinking about that. Let me see. Julia Heberlin. Let me get the book title really quickly here. Oh, we are all the same in the dark.
We're all the same in the dark. That's a great book.
Gosh, that's amazing. So one of the things that happened to me over the pandemic is that for whatever reason, I kind of lost my ability or my stamina for reading in a traditional fashion. So I switched up. I tried to listen to audiobooks like forever ago, right? I listened to Bill Bryson's Walk in the Woods. That was great. Yeah, that was forever ago. And then every one that I tried to listen to after that sounded like garbage to me, right?
It's the narrator.
I never did. What's that?
The narrator. Honestly, the narrators really make or break a book. There are times where there's a book I might want to listen to, and I'll see who the narrator is, and it's like, it's just, I mean, the narrators really help make and break a book.
Right. And so, but then when I kind of lost my ability to read traditionally, either online or in paper, without like going to sleep, then I turned back to audiobooks, and it's just been fantastic. And so now what I've been doing was like, I'll do a jigsaw puzzle and listen to the book, you know, and that was one of the ones that, so I'm going to read all of her stuff. And then other ones recently, like, I read all the CJ Tudor books, right? Those are fantastic. The Alex North books, those scared me. Those two really did scare me. And then what's the guy's name? Chismar?
Richard Chismar, yeah,
Yes.
the
Chasing
chasing
the Boogeyman.
the boogeyman, yeah,
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 that
yeah.
was,
He was the publisher of Cemetery Dance and stuff, and
yeah, yeah.
you know he's written with Stephen King. I have one of his copies here too. What I want to talk about though is Julia's book. We're all
Oh,
the
yeah.
same in the dark. What I really liked about it, I mean, I think, I mean, it's a very compelling story, and I was actually talking to a friend of mine about this, where she had these like scene breaks within a scene.
Mhm.
It was very interesting, but it like kind of, I always felt like it kind of kept the story going. But and I've never really seen this done before. Like I've seen where sometimes you'll have, you know, you'll have like one narrator and you'll have another narrator, and they'll be back and forth, you know, like A, B, A, B, A, B. But what she does here is essentially, and I don't want to give too much away. I mean, obviously, you know, because you read it, but like they start off with this one narrator, and then you don't really hear from him for the rest of the book, which is very
Right,
interesting.
right,
And
right.
and then you basically have these two other narrators, but like the way just the structure of the novel, I don't know, I just felt it was very fascinating the way the
Really,
structure
really
was. I've never really seen that
discursive.
done like that before.
Seriously discursive. And I've actually seen some people try it and really fail miserably, right? Where with that kind of mode of having, I think part of what you're talking about here is having a narrator talk about the moment of action that they're in, and then they go for a long time to talk about, you know, maybe why the color green and blue, why daisies are important, all right, or why daffodils, or yeah, daisies are important, or dandelions. That's right, that's dandelions in that book, and to sort of remember that and then come back to the moment of the story. So it's kind of slow moving in that way, and then all of a sudden there's a huge jump from the protagonist that you've been following, and all of a sudden it's many years later, and
Yeah.
it's an
Yeah.
amazing thing to read.
Yeah. I remember when I was reading it, and then yeah, they skipped to that one part later, and you're like, wait, this really happened? Because you're like,
Yeah,
no,
yeah, yeah.
because you becomes, yeah. And again, I don't want to give too much away for anybody who hasn't read it yet, but no, it was really, really good book. The same, like I had gone to, yeah, I ended up grabbing a bunch of her other novels,
Yeah,
because it was one of those books, you know, and every once in a while you run into an author like that where you read one of their books and you're like, holy shit, this is amazing.
yeah,
I gotta go find everything else that they write.
that's
But yeah,
absolutely next on my deal, is to read the rest of the books. And then I'm returning in audiobook form. I'm returning to as many of the Joe R. Lansdale books as I can, because they're just fantastic. You know, he's just a hero of mine, and Moon Lake was really, really beautifully done. And I want to go back and sort of reread in audio form all the things that he's written.
yeah, I'm trying to think, if does Will Patton read some of his books?
Probably, yeah, that would be
Because I
really
know that Will
natural.
Patton does a lot of the oh man, I'm completely blanking on his name right now. James Lee Burke. He does a lot of the
Right.
James Lee
That
Burke
would be a
books,
natural. Yeah.
and Will Patton is he's just the perfect voice for that every time. I mean, I know he's a great actor, but it's one of those things too where
Yeah.
it's just like, you know, he should just be narrating a lot of these books.
Mhm.
So
Well, that's the neat thing about the Alex North books. Those are Doctor Who. I can't remember his name now. Well, the first. It's just really beautifully done. But yeah, the Moon Lake, I recommend that highly in terms of listening to that performance. It's just really amazing. That's Lansdale's latest.
yeah, perfect. So I can't think of anything else. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Let's see what was on our list there. Well, you know, this is really a lot of fun. I love talking about this. Can I just talk a little bit about our history here a little bit? All right.
Sure.
So as Robert told you, I have been teaching at Mason a long, long time. We actually tried to get Rob to come to Mason, but he decided that was not for him. But I would be teaching, but he invented, he very early on was promoting hint fiction You want to tell them what hint fiction is again?
Well, so hint fiction, I don't know how much time we want to spend on this, but essentially, one of the greatest, shortest stories in the world has always been considered an Ernest Hemingway story, which he may or may not have written, which was For Sale, Baby Shoes Never Worn.
Mhm.
And for a couple of years, I think it was back, when you talked about blogs, like, I'd come up with, I had a blog and it was like, okay, well, how can I get, and this was, I think even before, around time Facebook and Twitter and stuff was really starting to come up.
Right.
But, and thinking about it too, for a lot of these authors who came up, before social media, it's always like, how did they really manage to grow a fan base? Because I mean, really was by word of mouth in terms of like bookstores and libraries or whatever else, because there was no way to really help promote stuff. Anyway, long story short, I had a blog. I wanted to kind of do something. So I had written this really funny kind of tongue-in-cheek essay, basically calling these really short stories hint fiction, because they're hinting at a larger story. And honestly, it was more as a joke, but it became something. And
what you did was you were just running it and you said, okay, you put it out there. Okay, if you become like one of the top 20 in this first contest, I'll give you a $20 gift card, right?
Yeah, and again, it was this idea, like I wanted to kind of promote this. I thought it would be fun. And yeah, I had said that there was gonna be this hint fiction contest, and I've known the author Stuart Nan for a very long time. And for whatever reason, I just asked them, hey, would you be like the judge for this? I'll do like a top 20 or whatever, and I'll send it to you. And he's like, sure. And by having him linked to that, somehow got the attention of some people in the publishing. And then, yeah, W.W. Norton had reached out and they asked about doing an anthology. And it was one of those things where I'd gone to my agent at the time and said, hey, I want to put together a collection of these stories, and we tried to shop that, like nothing would have happened. It was just one of those weird things that just came about. And just, I don't think you could ever even like replicate just how that even occurred. It was
right.
really,
Well, the timing was
crazy.
perfect. The timing was perfect. At the same time that everybody was sort of pivoting toward much shorter fiction, the same time online publishing becomes popular. It's a perfect storm, that sort of thing. And even in my own classes, I would go to my classes, I'd say, okay, here, look at this. Never pass up a chance to show off. And it turned out that one of my students who rarely ever came to class ended up in your anthology.
Well, what's funny is he told me, he's like, you know what, I am in Laura Ellen Scott class and I never go. And I said, perfect, we're going to put you in there. Yeah. So wait, which one was that? Who was that?
I don't remember now. And we're not allowed to say either. That'd be a violation of FERPA probably.
Oh, okay. Well, I will say though, a lot of those stories we did read blind when they came in, for the most part. Although the publisher did want us to solicit stories from some big name authors,
right.
So, and it was kind of like, at the time I was like, really, but I understand. But yeah, we had the anthology was out. It was 125 stories, I think, in the entire collection. And if there's any college professors out there, I would encourage you to teach it in your class.
Absolutely.
That would be good.
Yeah. But I mean, that kind of activity is definitely what led to my first book contract. The kind of publishing online, flash fiction, very small fiction, that kind of thing, doing a lot of that. Got a random email from Dorothy Allison, wrote me and said, I'm off to do the Tin House workshop. I'm printing out your stories because they're so good and I'm going to share them with my classes there, and then that got passed on to Cocktail Talk at a New York party, where somebody who was actually an agent at Dorothy Allison's agency said, oh, well, connect Laura up with me, that sort of thing. And that sort of started me actually seriously trying to write books. I did not write a good book for him. He was very generous. I did not write a good book for him, but there's all this stuff that feels like you're just playing around can lead to something really good.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, in retrospect, had I tried to write a essay, in all seriousness with the idea that, oh, maybe this could become a thing, like it would not, you know what I mean? Yeah. It was one of those things you just never really know. You just
Mhm.
never really know. I mean, thankfully it all worked out, I think, in the end. I was really proud of how the anthology turned out, and,
Sure.
with whatever else. And I still see people online talk about him fiction every once in a while. But yeah, had I, started this whole thing from the very beginning, being like, I'm going to create this thing, and it's like, no, that'd been nuts.
Right. Right.
So, and then, yeah, so George Mason, there was a time where I thought I wanted to, go back to graduate school and stuff. And then I decided, no,
Yeah,
I
I know.
I don't know. Cause I mean, yeah, I don't want to
You
get
had
into it,
Nick
but
on earlier, and he really stirred the MFA shit pot there for a while on Twitter, which was enjoyable to watch. But it's I'm pro education myself, but it's all different for everybody.
yeah, I mean, for me, it was mostly just at the time. I think had I been younger, not married at the time,
Uh,
I mean, quite honestly, when I had gone to my undergraduate, I didn't, I, I've always wanted to write, I liked reading. So I was an English major. But
mhm.
even that wasn't anything. A girl I'd been dating at the time was basically like, well, what are you going to do with it? And I was like, that's a good question. I'm like, well, I want to be a writer. And it's like, okay. But so I then switched to English education. So I was like, well, I guess I need to something to do with my English, major. But like, I never took any like creative writing courses at the college or whatever. And honestly didn't really know that, there were these graduate life, like you could go to college to be a writer. Like, I
Mhm.
don't even know how I never really figured that out. Cause I think mostly coming up, like in high school and middle school, I was reading like, Michael Crichton, Stephen King. And so, it wasn't like I was reading a lot of like literary authors who I knew like, oh, okay, there was the Iowa Writers Workshop, there were a lot of these like schools where you could go to. So it wasn't anything I was really aware of at the time. And
Mhm.
then later when I kind of thought about it, ultimately again, was much older, married, and ultimately decided, you know what, I just want to spend that time, I guess, working on books. You know what I mean? So it was nothing against, the whole
Oh no, you don't have to
graduate programming of
defend
it.
your choices. I'm just saying that there's a lot of different roads there. Um, and I'm not doing what I did in grad school, right? But I am teaching it. Like next fall, I'm actually teaching on a novel writing course in popular genres. We're doing science fiction, fantasy, horror, and crime.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Do you feel that then, because you were right, I mean, for a long time, that was graduate writing programs were more literary. They wanted to look more, John Cheever, John Updike type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Do you
Minimalism,
feel that
yeah.
the genre has really kind of come in? Because that was a question I remember having. I forget what college I was at, but I had been, actually, it was because of Hint Fiction. I was out in California at the time, and I remember meeting with somebody at one of the graduate programs and asking, how do they feel about genre fiction? Because occasionally I might write, quote unquote literary stuff, but mostly it's more, crime, mystery, thriller, a few, horror. Do you feel that really over the last decade or so that really genre has become much more acceptable?
It
And
has, it's large, but you're right, it's totally driven by the students. So the faculty that have been in place have had to pivot and figure out, how to find the way that they can help somebody who wants to develop that kind of work. But also, you have a really important position that pop genre is taking here. I mean, pop genre has always been about social commentary, right? But now it's actually becoming recognized in the lit world as something that really kind of has a lot of relevance, right? And for a lot of the students that we have in our programs now, they really want to write about characters where they are represented, where their identities are represented, and the place that has been most open and welcoming to that has been genre. I think crime has always had a sort of priority there, in that it's really easy to say literary crime, and but harder to attach literary to some of the other genres. But in fact, it certainly happens, But yeah, I think this is largely driven by what young writers want to do.
yeah. And I mean, ultimately, when you think about it too, when you look at genre, off the top of my head, I can't really think of any, but I mean, even like Beloved is essentially a horror story.
Exactly.
It's really all about how, how the publisher decides to market it, where the booksellers try to do, and ultimately, what readers or what just the, literary community decides to deem a certain novel.
Mm-hmm.
So, You know, a lot of these books that are genre are deemed literary
Yeah.
for one reason or another. And then other, you know, so yeah, I mean, it's ultimately, it's just kind of silly, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that you also, as you start seeing more and more cross genre work, you start seeing a lot of expectations of formula being turned on its head, you know. So
Yeah.
there's a
I
lot
mean,
of complication going on there.
I mean, even look at like David Mitchell's like Cloud Atlas.
Yeah.
Like ultimately, you probably would say, you know, I'm sure it's considered literary, but in many ways, it's, you know, it's science fiction.
Mhm.
But you know, God forbid you say it's science fiction. You're not going to find it in the science fiction section. You're going to find it in literary.
Mhm.
But yeah, no, yeah, that was good conversation.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, so everybody check out Laura's new book, Blue Billy. It is available on Amazon and other places, or is on the
Yeah,
publisher's website.
we're having a book launch party at One More Page Books and More. If you're local to the Northern Virginia area, that's in Falls Church, and we're going to have a book signing there, and that's when the print books sort of flood out and that sort of thing. And really looking forward to that. It's going to be an in-person event, masked. You do have to register for it, but it also will have an online component too, as well.
All right, very cool. So everybody check it out. And again, the book is Blue Billy. So thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much.